A lost camera found after 23 years unlocks the truth behind a missing couple. The dust was a living thing in Blackwood Manor. It danced in the slivers of moonlight that pierced the boarded-up windows, coating every surface in a fine grey shroud, like volcanic ash after a long-dead eruption. Leo breathed it in, the taste of it metallic and dry on his tongue, the smell a thick, cloying perfume of decay, damp, and forgotten things. He was 21, an urban explorer who chased the ghosts of abandoned places, and Blackwood was the Holy Grail. For 23 years it had stood empty, a monument to a mystery that had seeped into local legend. The disappearance of Alara and Julian Vance. His flashlight beam cut a nervous path through the gloom of the grand foyer, illuminating a staircase that swept upwards into darkness, its marble steps cracked and littered with fallen plaster. The air was heavy, oppressive, clinging to his skin like a damp sheet. Every creak of the floorboards under his boots sounded like a gunshot in the profound silence. He wasn't just trespassing, he was desecrating a tomb. The Vances had vanished from this house on a balmy August night in 2002. Their car was still in the garage, their wallets and keys on the kitchen counter, a half-finished bottle of wine, sweating condensation next to 2 glasses. They had simply ceased to be. Leo's goal was the nursery. It was the one room, the police reports, which he'd devoured online, mentioned with a strange, almost superstitious reverence. It was located in the East Wing, overlooking a garden that had long since surrendered to a savage tangle of weeds and thorns. He found the door hanging slightly ajar, a dark mouth in the long shadowed hallway. He pushed it open, and the scent hit him first, not just dust, but something else. Something faintly sweet, like old potpourri and spoiled milk. The room was a pastel nightmare. The wallpaper, peeling in long curling strips, was patterned with faded rocking horses and smiling lambs. In the center of the room stood a single, ornate crib, its wooden bars like the ribs of a small skeleton. A thick layer of dust blanketed a rocking chair in the corner, and a mobile of faded yellow moons and stars hung motionless above the crib. A silent galaxy in the stagnant air. His lights swept across the floor, and that's when he saw it. Tucked into the shadowy space between a fallen dresser and the wall, half buried in debris and filth, was a camera. It was an old Olympus Trip 35, a classic, its black leatherette body caked in grime. It looked like a discarded toy, a piece of junk. But, as Leo knelt, his heart thumping a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs, he felt a strange pull. This wasn't just trash, it was an artifact. He picked it up. The camera was cold, its metal body leaching the chill of the house into his palm. It felt heavy, substantial. He wiped a patch of dust from the lens with his thumb, the glass beneath surprisingly clear. Like a single unblinking eye staring back at him, he turned it over in his hands. The back was latched shut. On a whim, he checked the film counter, a tiny window on the top. The number was 24. That meant there was film inside. Film that had been sitting in the dark, in this dead, silent room. For 23 years, a shiver, entirely separate from the house's cold, traced a path down his spine. The Vances Alara had been a photographer. A hobbyist, the articles said. She loved taking candid artistic shots. Was this hers? Had she dropped it on that final terrible night? The thought was electric, a jolt of adrenaline that cut through the haze of dust and decay. This wasn't just an artifact, it was a witness. He had to get it out of there. The oppressive atmosphere of the nursery was suddenly suffocating, the smiling lambs on the wallpaper seeming to mock him with their vacant, painted eyes. He clutched the camera to his chest, its cold form a talisman against the creeping dread, and backed out of the room, his flashlight beam trembling. He didn't look back. The drive home was a blur. The Olympus sat on the passenger seat, a silent, potent passenger, back in his small apartment, under the stark, unforgiving light of his desk lamp. The camera seemed even more out of place, a relic from a lost world. He cleaned it carefully, reverently, using soft cloths and Q-tips to coax the grime from its crevices. Beneath the dirt, it was in remarkably good condition. He popped the back latch. The click was unnervingly loud in the quiet of his room. Inside, nestled in its compartment, was a roll of Kodak Gold 200. It was fully wound. A time capsule. Finding someone to develop a 23-year-old roll of film wasn't easy. Most labs would have laughed him out the door. But Leo knew a guy. Arthur Pembroke, a cantankerous old man who ran a dusty hole-in-the-wall photography shop downtown. A place that smelled of fixer and nostalgia. Arthur was a purist, a man who believed digital photography was a soulless fad. He was Leo's only hope, Arthur grumbled. When Leo placed the camera on his counter the next day, Olympus trip. Good little machine, he rasped, his voice like gravel. Haven't seen one of these in years. There's film inside, Leo said, his voice barely a whisper. It's old. Really old. Arthur peered at him over the top of his spectacles. How old? 23 years. The old man's eyebrows shot up. He took the camera, his gnarled fingers surprisingly gentle as he opened the back and extracted the canister. He held it up to the light, turning it over. Kodak Gold. Sturdy stuff, but 23 years in an uncontrolled environment. It's a long-shot, kid. The emulsion could be completely degraded. You'll be lucky to get shadows, if you get anything at all. I have to try, Leo insisted. It's important. Arthur gave him a long, appraising look, then shrugged. All right, but don't get your hopes up. This isn't magic. It's chemistry, and chemistry is a fickle bitch. Come back tomorrow. Leo didn't sleep that night. He paced his apartment. The image of the nursery burned into his mind. He kept seeing the crib, the silent mobile, the peeling wallpaper. He felt like he had disturbed a grave, and the camera was the bone he had stolen. What secrets did it hold? What had that little glass eye seen? The call came the next afternoon. It wasn't a text or a casual "it's ready." It was a call. Leo's phone vibrated against the table, and he saw Arthur's name flash on the screen. His mouth went dry. Hello, Leo. Get down here. Now. Arthur's voice was tight, strained, stripped of its usual curmudgeonly tone. It was the voice of a man who had seen a ghost. Leo was there in 10 minutes, his heart hammering against his ribs. The shop was empty, the closed sign hanging crookedly in the door. Arthur unlocked it for him, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly. He didn't say a word, just led Leo through the cluttered shop into the humid red-lit sanctuary of the darkroom. An easel stood under the enlarger, and on it, clipped and still damp, was a single photograph. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The image was grainy, the colors slightly washed out, but it was undeniably, horrifyingly clear. It was a woman's face, a close-up, her features contorted in a mask of pure terror. Her eyes, wide and wild, stared directly into the lens. They were beautiful eyes, a shade of deep crystalline blue, but now they were filled with a frantic, primal fear. A man's hand was clamped brutally over her mouth, the fingers digging into her cheek, silencing a scream. My God, Leo breathed, the words catching in his throat. It's her, it's Ilara Vance. He knew it instantly. He had seen dozens of her photos online, society pictures of her smiling at galas, vacation snaps of her laughing on a yacht. This was the same woman, but stripped of all her glamour, all her poise. This was a woman facing the abyss. The background, Arthur whispered, his voice hoarse. He pointed a shaky finger at the top right corner of the photograph. Look at the wallpaper. Leo leaned closer, his nose almost touching the slick surface of the print. Faded, but unmistakable. Rocking horses, smiling lambs. It's the nursery, Leo said, a cold dread washing over him. She took this picture in the nursery. She didn't take it, Kid. Arthur corrected him, his voice grim. Look at the angle, it's low tilted, like the camera was on the floor, pointing up, or maybe ... maybe it was dropped. They stood in silence for a long moment, the hum of the enlarger filling the small room. The image of Alara's terrified face burning itself into their retinas. It was a moment frozen in time, a scream captured in silver halide. This wasn't just a picture. It was the first frame of a horror story. There's more, Arthur said finally, his voice barely audible. He reached for a fresh sheet of photographic paper, his movements slow, deliberate, as if he were handling something sacred or profane. The roll wasn't blank. I managed to salvage 5 more frames. They're a sequence. Leo's blood ran cold. A sequence. The camera hadn't just captured a single moment of terror. It had recorded what happened next. Arthur worked with a grim focus, his hands moving through the familiar ballet of the darkroom process. He exposed the next negative, slid the paper into the developer tray, and gently rocked it back and forth. Leo watched, mesmerized, as an image slowly, ghost-like, began to emerge from the milky whiteness. This one was a blur of motion, a chaotic swirl of shapes and shadows. It was as if the camera had been falling, tumbling through the air. In the center of the chaos, you could just make out a shape: a man's leg, a polished leather shoe. The third photo was sharper. The camera was on the floor now, lying on its side. The perspective was skewed, looking up at a corner of the nursery. The leg was there again, closer this time, and a hand. A man's hand, hanging limp at his side. He was wearing a gold signet ring on his little finger. Julian Vance wore a ring like that, Leo whispered, the information dredged up from the deep well of his obsessive research. It was a family heirloom. The fourth picture was the same skewed angle, but something had changed. Another figure had entered the frame. A shadow, a silhouette, standing over the camera, looking down. The figure was tall, broad-shouldered, but their face was lost in the darkness. A featureless void against the dim light from the nursery window. Leo felt a profound sense of violation, of voyeurism. He was watching a murder unfold, frame by agonizing frame. He was seeing what no one was ever meant to see. "The next one," Arthur said, his voice cracking. "It's the last one with a clear image. The rest is just blackness." He prepared the final print, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped the paper. He slid it into the developer, and they both held their breath, waiting for the ghost to appear. It was the clearest image of them all. The camera was still on the floor, but its position had shifted slightly, as if kicked. It was now pointing directly at the silhouette. The figure had knelt down. The dim light from the window caught the side of his face, illuminating a sharp jawline, a high cheekbone, the glint of an eye. But that wasn't the detail that made Leo's stomach clench, that made the air rush from his lungs in a ragged gasp. The man kneeling in the nursery, his face a mask of cold, predatory focus, was holding something in his hand. It was a length of rope, and he wasn't looking at Ilara or Julian, or whatever horror was unfolding just out of frame. He was looking directly down, directly into the lens of the camera, as if he knew it was there, as if he was posing for one final, triumphant photograph before the darkness swallowed everything. Arthur stumbled back, knocking over a tray of chemicals with a clatter. "Who is that?" he choked out, his face ashen. "Who the hell is that?" Leo couldn't answer. He could only stare at the face in the photograph, a face he knew he had seen before, but couldn't place. A face that was both familiar and monstrous. The face of a ghost who had walked free for 23 years. The camera hadn't just been a witness, it was an accuser. And its voice, silent for 2 decades, was finally beginning to speak. The final frame wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a reckoning. And as Leo stared into the cold, dead eyes of the man in the photograph, he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this discovery wouldn't just solve a mystery, it would unleash a monster. The man in the photograph was Marcus Thorne. The realization didn't strike Leo like a lightning bolt. It crept in like a slow-acting poison hours later, as he sat in his apartment, the 5 horrifying prints spread across his coffee table like a tarot reading of the damned. He'd been frantically searching online, cross-referencing old articles about the Vances with society pages from the early 2000s, when he saw it. A picture from a charity gala, dated 6 months before the disappearance. Ilara and Julian Vance were in the center, radiant and smiling, the perfect golden couple. And standing just behind them, partially obscured but undeniably present, was Marcus Thorne, his hand resting possessively on Julian's shoulder, a thin predatory smile on his lips that didn't reach his eyes, Marcus Thorne. The name opened a floodgate of information. He was Julian's business partner, the co-founder of their spectacularly successful and then spectacularly failed tech firm, Elysian, which had imploded in a storm of debt and scandal just weeks before the Vances vanished. The media, at the time, had painted Thorne as the other victim, the loyal friend left to pick up the pieces of his partner's catastrophic mismanagement and sudden flight. He had given tearful interviews, his voice thick with a carefully rehearsed betrayal. "I loved Julian like a brother," he had told a reporter, his eyes glistening under the studio lights. "I just can't understand how he could do this. To me, to Alara, to everyone who trusted him." He had sold the company's remaining assets, paid off a fraction of the debts, and then, like a phoenix rising from the ashes of his friend's ruin, had gone on to build a new, even more formidable, empire. Now, Marcus Thorne was a titan of industry, a philanthropist, a man whose name was etched onto university buildings and hospital wings. He was untouchable, a pillar of the community. His past as Julian Vance's partner, a forgotten footnote, a testament to his resilience. But in the grainy photograph taken in a dying house, he was not a philanthropist. He was a killer. The signet ring on Julian's hand in the third photo, the length of rope in Thorne's grasp in the fifth, it was a story told in fragments, a mosaic of death. Julian was already down, likely unconscious or dead, when the camera captured his leg and hand. Alara, her face a mask of terror, was being silenced. And Marcus Thorne was the architect of it all, the hidden witness who was never a witness at all. He was the antagonist. The victims, Alara and Julian, began to take on a new, tragic dimension for Leo. They weren't just headlines anymore, they were flesh and blood. He found Alara's old photography blog, an archived ghost of a website she'd called Chasing the Light. It was filled with her work-hauntingly beautiful black and white photos of cityscapes at dawn, intimate portraits of strangers, and, most poignantly, candid shots of Julian. But they weren't the pictures of a happy marriage. As Leo scrolled back through the months leading up to their disappearance, a subtle narrative of despair began to emerge. The photos of Julian became less frequent, and when he did appear, he looked haunted. There were dark circles under his eyes, a tension in his jaw that his forced smiles couldn't hide. He was often pictured from behind, or with his face in shadow, as if Alara was trying to capture his essence without confronting the emptiness in his eyes. One post, from July 2002, just a month before they vanished, was particularly chilling. It was a photo of a single dead bird on the manicured lawn of Blackwood Manor. The caption beneath it read, "Some cages are gilded. It doesn't make them any less of a cage." Leo felt a profound, aching sadness for her. Alara wasn't just a society wife. She was an artist, a sensitive soul trapped in a life that was suffocating her. Her camera was her only escape, her only way of telling the truth. And in the end, it had told the whole terrible story. Julian, too, was more than the reckless fraud. The media had portrayed him as Leo delved into old financial reports, forum posts from disgruntled Elysian employees. A picture formed of a brilliant but naive young man, an idealist who had been utterly steamrolled by his partner. Marcus Thorne was the shark, the ruthless pragmatist. Julian was the visionary, the heart of the company. And the heart had been eaten alive. An anonymous post on a tech message board from 2002 described Julian in the final weeks. He was a ghost. He'd walk the halls of the office late at night, just staring at the empty desks. Kept muttering about the numbers not adding up. Said Thorne had locked him out of the main accounts. Everyone thought he was cracking under the pressure. Now I think he knew he was a dead man walking. The broken pasts were clear. Julian, betrayed and ruined by the man he trusted most. Alara, trapped and terrified, documenting her own slow-motion demise. And Marcus Thorne, the predator who had orchestrated it all, building his empire on the bones of his friends. But there was a third character in this tragedy, a hidden witness whose story was yet to be told. Her name was Sarah Jenkins, and Leo found her through the only channel left, that remembered the Vances with any clarity. The comments section on a 20-year-old news article. Amidst the conspiracy theories and half-baked accusations, one comment stood out for its simple, heartbreaking sincerity. "She was the kindest person I ever knew," it read, posted by a user named SJ_2002. "She gave me a job when no one else would. I wish I had done more. I'm so sorry, Alara." It took Leo 3 days of obsessive cybersleuthing to connect the username to a real person. Sarah Jenkins had been the Vance's housekeeper. She was a young woman back then, a single mother struggling to make ends meet. The Vances had hired her, paid her well, treated her with a kindness she had never forgotten. After the disappearance, she had been questioned by the police, of course. Her statement was brief, unhelpful. She had left the house at 5 p.m. on the day they vanished. Everything seemed normal. Mr. Vance was in his study, on the phone. Mrs. Vance was in the garden. She saw nothing, heard nothing. Leo found her living in a small run-down bungalow 2 hours outside the city. It took him another day to work up the courage to go. What could he possibly say to her? "Hello, I'm an amateur ghoul who broke into your former employer's house, and I think I know who murdered them." He clutched the prints in a large manila envelope, his knuckles white. The truth felt like a grenade in his hands, and he was about to pull the pin. Sarah Jenkins was in her late 40s now, her face etched with the lines of a hard life, but her eyes were still sharp, intelligent. She opened the door, a crack, her expression wary. "Sarah Jenkins?" Leo asked, his voice unsteady. "Who's asking?" "My name is Leo. I need to talk to you about Elora and Julian Vance." The name hung in the air between them, a ghost summoned from the past. Sarah's face paled. The wariness in her eyes hardened into fear. "I have nothing to say about them. That was a long time ago." She tried to close the door. "Please," Leo said, his voice cracking with desperation. He stuck his foot in the doorway, a move he instantly regretted for its aggression. "Please, just look at this." He pushed the manila envelope through the gap. "I found it in the house." She hesitated, her eyes flickering from his face to the envelope. With a sigh of weary resignation, she took it. She retreated into the dim hallway of her house, leaving Leo standing on the crumbling stoop. He could hear the rustle of paper, then a sharp, strangled gasp. A moment later, a sob, raw and guttural, a sound of grief held captive for years. The door opened again. Sarah's face was a wreck, tears streaming down her cheeks. She stared at him, her eyes filled with a terrifying mixture of horror and recognition. "I knew it," she whispered, her voice trembling as she clutched the photograph of Marcus Thorne. "I knew it was him." He stepped inside. The house was modest, cluttered but clean. She led him to a small kitchen table and sank into a chair, the photos spread out before her. She couldn't take her eyes off the first one, the close-up of Ilara's terrified face. "Oh, Ilara," she murmured, her fingers tracing the edge of the print as if to comfort the woman in the image. "You poor, sweet woman." "You knew Thorne," Leo stated. More than asked, Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "He was always there, always. At first, I thought he and Julian were just close friends, partners, but it was wrong. The way he looked at them, both of them." She paused, struggling to find the words. "Like he owned them, Julian was. He was scared of him. I saw it." Towards the end, Julian would flinch when Thorne walked into a room. He was a puppy who had been kicked too many times. And Elora, she hated him, Sarah said with a sudden, fierce intensity. She saw him for what he was. She called him the smiling shark. She told me once she felt like he was watching her, even when he wasn't there. She said the house didn't feel like her own anymore. It felt like his. Sarah's hands trembled as she recounted the final day. Her official statement to the police had been a lie, a sin of omission that had haunted her for 2 decades. "I didn't leave at 5, she confessed, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I left closer to 6. I was in the laundry room, in the basement. I was supposed to be gone, but I'd forgotten my purse. As I was coming up the back stairs, I heard them arguing. In the foyer, Elara and Thorn. The scene played out in her memory, vivid and terrible. She was shouting at him. I'd never heard her raise her voice before. She was telling him to get out of her house, to leave her and Julian alone. She said she knew what he'd done. She said, "The money isn't gone, is it, Marcus? You just moved it." You framed him. He was calm. That was the scariest part. He just laughed. This low, awful sound. He said, "My dear Elara, you have no idea what I've done. But you will." Sarah had frozen on the stairs, her heart pounding. "I was terrified," she said, her eyes pleading with Leo for understanding. "He sounded like a monster. I thought he would kill me if he found me." I could hear Julian then, his voice weak, begging them to stop. "Not here, Marcus, please." And then I heard a sound, a thud, like someone falling, and then Elara screamed. It wasn't a long scream, it was cut off, just like in that picture. Shame washed over her face. "I ran," she whispered. "I didn't even grab my purse. I ran out the back door, got in my car, and I just drove. I didn't call the police. I was a single mum. I had a little boy. I was an undocumented worker back then. If I got involved, they would have deported me, taken my son. What was I supposed to do?" The question was a plea for absolution she had never received. She was the hidden witness, paralyzed by fear, her conscience a festering wound. "He came to see me," she added, the memory making her shudder. A week later, after the police had been all over the news, he showed up right here, at my door. He was wearing an expensive suit, holding a bouquet of flowers. He said he was just checking on everyone who had been close to the Vances, but it wasn't a courtesy call, it was a threat. She described the meeting with chilling clarity. Thorn hadn't raised his voice. He had smiled his thin, shark-like smile. He asked about her son, by name. He mentioned how hard it must be, raising a child on her own, how precarious her situation was. He never said, "I'll hurt you." He didn't have to, Sarah said, her voice trembling. He just looked at me, and I knew. I knew he was telling me that he could erase me, erase my son, just as easily as he had erased the Vances. So I kept my mouth shut. I lied to the police. I tried to forget, but I never did. Every single day, for 23 years, I have seen her face. I have heard that scream. She looked down at the photograph of Marcus Thorn, kneeling in the nursery, his face a portrait of cold, triumphant evil. "He got away with it," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and disgust. "He killed them, buried them, God knows where, and built a kingdom on their graves. And no one ever knew." "Someone knows now," Leo said, his voice quiet but firm. He looked at the 5 photographs, the faces of the victim, the antagonist, and the witness laid bare. The broken pasts, the festering secrets, the terrible injustice, it was all there. The camera had held its silence for 23 years, but now, it was screaming. And for the first time, someone was listening. The decision to go to the police was not an easy one. It felt like declaring war on a god. Marcus Thorn wasn't just a wealthy man. He was an institution, woven into the very fabric of the city's power structure. Leo and Sarah sat at her small kitchen table for hours, the 5 photographs lying between them like unholy relics. The initial shock had subsided, replaced by a gnawing, terrifying reality. They were in possession of a truth so explosive it could get them killed. "He'll destroy us," Sarah said, her voice flat with resignation. She had lived in fear of Thorn for more than 2 decades. That fear was a part of her, as essential as bone and blood. "You're a kid who breaks into buildings. I'm a nobody, he's Marcus Thorn. Who do you think they'll believe?" "The camera doesn't lie," Leo argued, his own bravado feeling thin and fragile. "The photos are proof." "Proof of what?" she countered, her gaze sharp. "That a man who looks like him was in a room 23 years ago. His lawyers will call it a fabrication, a digital fake. They'll say, you're an extortionist. They'll dig into my past, my immigration status back then. They'll paint me as an unreliable, hysterical woman. He will bury us, Leo. He has the money and the power to make anything true. She was right. They couldn't just walk into a police station. They needed more. They needed something undeniable, something that couldn't be spun or dismissed. They needed the camera itself and the negatives. Arthur. The thought hit Leo with a jolt of panic. He had left the negatives with Arthur. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers slick with sweat. He dialed the old photographer's number. It rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. "Arthur, it's Leo. Call me. It's urgent. Don't talk to anyone about the photos. It's important." He tried again, an hour later, voicemail, and again. The silence on the other end of the line felt sinister, a void where Arthur's gravelly voice should be. A cold knot of dread tightened in Leo's stomach. He drove back to the city like a man possessed, Sarah's warnings echoing in his head. The familiar clutter of Arthur's shop was visible through the front window, but the closed sign was still there, and a stillness hung over the place that felt wrong. Leo pounded on the door. "Arthur, are you in there?" Only silence answered. He peered through the mail slot, his heart hammering against his ribs. He could see the darkroom door, slightly ajar. A thin sliver of red light bled from the gap. He went around the back, to the alleyway entrance he'd used before. The door was locked. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled panic, he rammed his shoulder against it. The old wood splintered, and the lock gave way with a sickening crack. Leo stumbled inside, into the cluttered back room. The smell hit him first. Not the familiar scent of photographic chemicals, but something else. Something acrid and sharp. The smell of smoke. The darkroom was a scene of methodical devastation. The trays of chemicals were overturned. Their contents pooled on the floor in dark, viscous puddles. Prints and equipment were smashed, strewn across the counters and the ground, and in the center of the room, in a large metal sink, were the charred, blackened remains of a fire. Leo's breath caught in his throat. He plunged his hand into the disgusting, ashy sludge, his fingers searching desperately. He found fragments, pieces of twisted celluloid, their edges melted and curled like burnt leaves. The negatives, they were destroyed. Everything was gone. And then he saw him. Arthur. The old man was slumped in a corner, behind the enlarger, almost hidden in the shadows. His glasses were askew, and a dark, ugly bruise was blooming on his temple. A trickle of dried blood crusted at the corner of his mouth. He was breathing, but his breaths were shallow, ragged. "Arthur!" Leo cried, rushing to his side. He gently shook the old man's shoulder. Arthur groaned, his eyelids fluttering. "Leo," he rasped, his voice a dry, papery whisper. "What happened? Who did this?" Arthur's eyes struggled to focus. "A man came by, said he was a collector, interested in old cameras." He coughed, a wet, rattling sound. He asked, "About the Olympus? The one you brought in?" I got a bad feeling. Told him I didn't know what he was talking about. The story came out in painful, fragmented sentences. The man hadn't believed him. He had become aggressive, demanding the photos from the Vaughns' house. When Arthur refused, the man had torn the place apart. He hadn't been looking for money. He had a singular, terrifying purpose: to find and destroy the evidence. "He hit me," Arthur whispered, his hand weakly touching his bruised temple. "He found the negatives, burned them. Then he took the prints, all of them, and the camera." Leo felt the floor drop out from beneath him. The camera was gone. The negatives were gone. The prints were gone. All of it, their proof, had been erased from existence in a matter of hours. "The man," Leo said, his voice tight with dread. "What did he look like?" "Expensive suit," Arthur mumbled, his eyes closing again. "Smiled too much. Cold eyes, like a shark." It was Thorne's man. There was no doubt. He had been so careful, so methodical. He hadn't killed Arthur, just incapacitated him. A murder would draw too much attention. This was a message. A brutal, unequivocal statement of his power. "I know you have it, and I can take it away whenever I want." The police and paramedics arrived, and the scene devolved into a controlled chaos of flashing lights and official voices. Leo gave a statement, carefully omitting any mention of Marcus Thorne. He just said it was a robbery gone wrong. He sounded unconvincing even to his own ears. The detective, a wary-looking woman named Sandoval, gave him a long, skeptical look. You find an old camera in a haunted house, develop the film, and a day later your friend gets beaten and his shop gets torched by a guy in an expensive suit looking for that specific camera. You're leaving something out, kid. Leo just shook his head, his face a mask of numb fear. He knew what Sarah had known all along. They were out of their league. This was a game played by different rules, and they didn't even know how to begin. The antagonist was growing bolder. The attack on Arthur was a direct assault, a brutal display of Thorne's reach and his utter ruthlessness. He wasn't hiding in the shadows anymore. He was actively hunting them. The next few days were a blur of paranoia. Leo felt like he was being watched everywhere he went. A black sedan seemed to be parked on his street at all hours. He would see men in suits in his peripheral vision, only for them to vanish when he turned to look. He stopped answering his phone. He barely slept, jumping at every creak and groan of his apartment building. He was a prisoner in his own home, the fear a constant, metallic taste in his mouth. He received a package one morning. A small, elegant, black box left on his doorstep, with no return address. His name was printed on it in perfect, cursive script. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black satin, was a single, pristine Q-tip. It made no sense. It was just a Q-tip. But as he stared at it, a cold, sickening realization dawned. Forensics, DNA. His DNA was all over that camera. And now Thorne had it. It wasn't just a threat anymore, it was leverage. I can prove you were there. I can put you in that house. With that camera, I can turn you from a witness into a suspect. He could be framed for trespassing, for breaking and entering, even for planting fabricated evidence. Thorne was not just destroying the proof against him, he was creating a case against Leo. The betrayals began to pile up. Leo reached out to a journalist he knew, a freelance reporter named Ben who specialized in cold cases. He met him in a crowded coffee shop, speaking in low, urgent tones. Laying out the whole story, the camera, the photos, the attack on Arthur. Ben seemed fascinated, his eyes wide, scribbling furiously in his notepad. He promised to look into it, to be discreet. "This is huge," he'd said. "The story of a lifetime." 2 days later, an article appeared online. Not in a reputable newspaper, but on a sleazy, bottom-feeding gossip blog known for character. "Assassinations," the headline screamed. "Desperate conspiracy theorist attempts to extort millionaire philanthropist Marcus Thorne with faked photos." The article, written by an anonymous author, quoted a source close to the investigation who described Leo as an unstable, fame-hungry crank. It mentioned his urban exploration, painting him as a delinquent and a vandal. It detailed his elaborate and clumsy attempt to extort money from Thorne, who was portrayed as the magnanimous victim of a cruel hoax. The article even included a security photo of Leo entering Arthur's building, making him look furtive and criminal. Ben had sold him out. Thorne had gotten to him, paid him off for the story and the betrayal. Leo felt a wave of nausea. He had trusted someone, and that trust had been turned into a weapon against him. Thorne was controlling the narrative, expertly and brutally. He was discrediting his accusers before they could even speak. Sarah faced her own humiliations. A notice appeared on her door from Immigration and Customs Enforcement, a routine audit of her citizenship, which she had obtained 15 years ago. It was anything but routine. It was Thorne, pulling strings, reminding her of her old vulnerability, reminding her that the past was never truly buried. Her son, now a successful young lawyer, got a call from his firm's senior partner. There were concerns about his mother, about a potential scandal that could reflect poorly on the firm. He was being subtly pressured to silence her. The tendrils of Thorne's influence were everywhere, choking them, isolating them, turning their own lives against them. The conflict had escalated from a search for truth into a desperate fight for survival. The victim, or rather the memory of the victims, was being desecrated all over again, their murder used as a foundation for a new campaign of terror. Leo and Sarah, the would-be champions of justice, were being systematically dismantled, their credibility shredded, their lives threatened, their deepest fears exploited. The breaking point came one rainy Tuesday night. Leo was in his apartment, the blinds drawn, when his laptop pinged. An anonymous email. The subject line was a single word: nursery. His blood ran cold. He opened it. There was no text, just an attachment. A single video file. With a trembling hand, he clicked play. The video was dark, grainy, clearly filmed on a phone. It was a live feed. The camera panned slowly across a familiar room, peeling wallpaper with faded rocking horses and smiling lambs. A dusty, ornate crib. A mobile of yellow moons and stars. It was the nursery in Blackwood Manor. Someone was in there. Right now, the camera panned down, to the floor. To the spot where he had found the Olympus camera. And on the floor, placed neatly in the center of the frame, was a photograph. It was a picture of him. A candid shot, taken from a distance. Him, walking out of his apartment building that morning. The message was clear, unambiguous, and utterly terrifying. I can get to you. I can get to the truth. I can get anywhere. You have nothing. I have everything. The video feed ended. Leo sat there, his body rigid, the glow of the screen reflecting in his wide, terrified eyes. The injustice was no longer an abstract concept, a story from the past. It was a physical presence, a monster that had crawled out of a 23-year-old photograph and into his life. He was trapped, cornered, and hunted. Thorne was no longer just protecting his secret. He was enjoying the cruelty of it. He was playing with them, and the game was far from over. The video of the nursery was a masterstroke of psychological terror. It pushed Leo to the edge of a precipice, leaving him with two choices: surrender or jump. Surrender meant accepting that Marcus Thorne was invincible, that the ghosts of Alara and Julian Vance would forever remain in their unmarked grave. It meant living with the fear, the paranoia, the knowledge that a monster walked the earth wearing the skin of a saint. Jumping meant doing something drastic, something reckless, something that could either save him or shatter him completely. He chose to jump. The fear didn't vanish, but it transmuted into something else. A cold, hard rage. Thorne had made a mistake. In his arrogance, in his enjoyment of the hunt, he had overplayed his hand. He had reminded Leo of the source of it, all: the house, Blackwood Manor. The camera was gone, the negatives destroyed, but the house itself remained. It was the one witness Thorne couldn't burn in a sink or intimidate into silence. Leo called Sarah. He sent me a video. From inside the nursery, he heard her sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Leo, you need to stop. This is over. He's won. No, Leo said, his voice a low, intense hum. He's reminded me of where to look, he thinks. He's destroyed all the evidence. But he only destroyed the evidence from the camera. What if there was something else? Ilara knew what he was, Sarah. She called him the smiling shark. She knew he was framing Julian. A woman that smart, that scared, she wouldn't just rely on a few photos. She would have a backup. An insurance policy. It was a long shot. A desperate gamble based on nothing but a gut feeling and a psychological profile he'd built of a dead woman. But it was all he had left. What are you going to do? Sarah asked, her voice laced with dread. I'm going back to Blackwood Manor was different this time. It wasn't a treasure hunt anymore. It was an infiltration. He went in broad daylight, disguised as a municipal surveyor, complete with a hard hat, a fluorescent vest, and a clipboard he'd bought from a dollar store. It was a flimsy disguise, but it was enough to deflect the casual glance of a curious neighbor. Thorne would have eyes on his apartment, on Sarah's house. But he wouldn't expect him to walk up to the front door of the manor in plain sight. The air inside was just as heavy, just as suffocating. But Leo's fear was now sharpened. To a fine point, he wasn't just looking for ghosts. He was looking for a secret. He went straight to the Vance's master bedroom, a space he had ignored on his first visit. It had been ransacked, but not by time. This was a human search. The drawers were pulled out, the mattress slashed, the contents of the wardrobe strewn. Across the floor, Thorne's men had been here. They had been looking for something, too. What had they missed? He thought about Ilara, an artist, a photographer, a woman who loved light and shadow, a woman who hid truths in plain sight. Where would she hide something? Not in a safe, not in a drawer, too obvious. It would be somewhere personal, somewhere meaningful. His eyes scanned the room, lingering on the wreckage. His gaze fell upon a large, ornate vanity table, its mirror spiderwebbed with cracks. The drawers were empty, but Leo ran his hands along the underside, searching for a hidden compartment, a taped-on key. Nothing. He pulled the vanity away from the wall, and that's when he saw it. It wasn't a hidden safe or a loose floorboard. It was a single, tiny mark on the faded floral wallpaper, right behind where the vanity had stood. A small, hand-drawn star, no bigger than his thumbnail, sketched in faint pencil. It was almost invisible, a ghost of a mark. It was the same simple, five-pointed star design as the ones on the mobile in the nursery. It was her signature. He stared at the star. It was a marker. But for what? He pressed on the wall around it. Nothing. He knocked, just the solid thud of plaster and lath. He felt a surge of frustration. Was it just a meaningless doodle? Had he come all this way for nothing? He stepped back, looking at the entire wall. The wallpaper was a pattern of repeating floral bouquets. He traced the pattern with his eyes. And then he saw it. The tiny star wasn't random. It was placed precisely in the center of one specific, unremarkable bouquet, an insurance policy. Something that couldn't be found in a frantic search. Something that could only be found by someone who knew what to look for. With trembling fingers, he took out his pocket knife and carefully, painstakingly, cut around the edges of that single floral bouquet. The wallpaper was brittle, and it peeled away with a dry, rustling sound. Behind it, there was nothing, just bare gray plaster. His heart sank. He had been wrong. It was all a fantasy, a desperate hope. He slumped against the wall, the taste of defeat bitter in his mouth. He ran his hand over the bare patch of plaster in frustration, and his fingers brushed against a line, a faint, almost invisible seam. His breath caught. He pushed, and a small, square section of the plaster, no bigger then a postcard, gave way, swinging inward on a tiny hidden hinge. It was a wall safe, a small, flat one, designed to be hidden behind drywall. A dummy compartment. Thorne's men, with their brute force and metal detectors, would have been looking for a metal box. This was plaster, hollow. Genius dot, and inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a small, leather-bound book, and a single, miniature audio cassette. The kind used in dictaphones and answering machines. Leo's hands shook so badly he could barely lift them out. He opened the book. It was Ilara's diary. Her handwriting was elegant, precise, a stark contrast to the chaos of her final days. The last entry was dated August 14, 2002. The day she disappeared. Marcus was here again. It began. He didn't even knock. He walks into my home as if it's his own. The pretense is over. He knows that I know. I confronted him about the Elysian accounts. I have the statements from Zurich. Julian was too terrified to look, but I hired a private investigator. It's all there. A shadow corporation. Wire transfers. He bled Elysian dry and left Julian's signature on the autopsy report. He called my husband a sinking ship and told me he was offering me the only lifeboat. By his side, he thinks I am weak. He thinks because I am a woman, I will crumble. He doesn't know the photograph I have. The one from the lake house last spring. The one Julian took. Marcus with his associate from the Cayman Islands. The one, the papers said, was a ghost. A money launderer. It's not perfect, but it's enough to connect him. It's in the camera. The Olympus. My little truth-teller, I keep it in the nursery now. It feels like the only safe place in this house. If you are reading this, it means I didn't make it. It means the smiling shark has finally bitten. Do not trust the police. Do not trust the lawyers. Marcus owns them all. The truth is in this tape. He will not stop. He will not rest until he has erased us, avenged us. The diary was the motive. The conspiracy, but the tape was the bombshell. Leo looked at the tiny cassette in his palm. What was on it? A confession, a threat. He had to know. Finding a microcassette player in the modern world was an odyssey in itself. He finally tracked one down at a dusty pawnshop, a relic from a bygone era of corporate dictation. Back in his apartment, with the door bolted and the curtains drawn, he inserted the tape. He put on his headphones, his heart pounding a deafening rhythm in his ears. He pressed play. There was a hiss of static, then a click, an answering machine, a beep, then a voice. A man's voice slurred, panicked. Julian Vancelera. Pick up, please, pick up. It's me. I'm at the office. Something's wrong. The servers? They're being wiped. Remotely. Marcus is here. He's not. He's not right. He's talking about starting over. A clean slate. He said we had to tie up all the loose ends. Oh God, Ilara, he's looking at me. He knows I'm on the phone. Don't come home. Go to your sister's. Take the camera. Take the diary. He knows about them. He asked me about the lake house photo. I have to go. He's coming. I love why the message ended with a sickening wet crunch. A thud. Then another voice. A voice that was smooth, calm, and dripping with venom. The voice of Marcus Thorne. Loose ends, the voice said, followed by a low, chilling chuckle. Then, the click of the phone being hung up. Leo ripped the headphones off, his body trembling with a violent, uncontrollable rage. It was all there. A recorded confession. The sound of Julian's murder. Thorne's voice, admitting his crime. The conspiracy wasn't just about money, it was about erasure, tying up loose ends. Ilara was the last one. The full, horrifying picture emerged. Thorne had killed Julian at the office, then gone to the house to silence Ilara, the one person who could expose him. He had to retrieve the diary and the camera with the incriminating photo. But Ilara had fought back. She had hidden the diary and the tape. The struggle in the nursery. She had dropped the camera, and in its final dying moments, it had captured the face of her killer. He had searched the house for the diary, but never found it. He had gotten away with the murders, but the one piece of evidence he'd missed had been ticking like a time bomb behind a plaster wall for 23 years. The stakes had shifted seismically. This was no longer just about the murders of Ilara and Julian Vance. This was about Marcus Thorne, the untouchable titan. The voicemail was not just a clue, it was a nuke. It could obliterate his empire, his reputation, his entire life. The personal pain of two families had morphed into a public scandal of epic proportions. Leo looked at the micro-cassette player, the diary, and the single remaining photograph. He had a digital copy of Thorne in the nursery, saved on his phone. He had the weapon, he had the motive, he had the confession. The tension in the room was suffocating. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't go to the police, not yet. He couldn't go to the media. Thorne had proven he controlled them. He had to detonate this bomb in a way that Thorne couldn't contain. He had to create a firestorm so massive it would consume Thorne before he could even call his lawyers. He thought about the upcoming Thorne Foundation charity ball, the city's premier philanthropic event, scheduled in 3 days. A gala celebrating the great man himself. All the city's elite would be there. All the major news networks would be covering it. Marcus Thorne would be on a stage, under the lights, accepting an award for his humanitarian work. It was the perfect stage for a public execution. Leo began to work, a feverish energy coursing through him. He digitized the audio from the microcassette, cleaning it up, amplifying the voices. He scanned every page of Ilara's diary. He created a simple, devastating video. It started with the smiling society photos of Ilara and Julian. Then, the 5 photos from the camera, a slow, horrifying zoom on Ilara's terrified face, then on Thorne's. Then, the diary pages flashed on screen. Ilara's elegant script, a silent accusation. And then, the audio, Julian's panicked voice, the sickening crunch, and Thorne's cold, final words, loose ends. He uploaded the video to a dozen different cloud servers. He wrote an email, addressed to every major news outlet in the country, every gossip blog, every true crime podcaster he could find. The subject line, "The Truth About Marcus Thorne. Live at the Thorne Foundation Ball." In the body of the email, he wrote a simple message, at 9 p.m. on Saturday night. During Marcus Thorne's acceptance speech, justice will be served. Here is the overture. He attached the video file. He scheduled the email to be sent at exactly 9:02 p.m. on Saturday, 2 minutes into Thorne's speech, enough time for him to feel comfortable, enough time for the trap to spring. This was it. Maximum tension. He had bypassed the system that Thorne owned and had created his own courtroom. A global digital courtroom from which there was no appeal. He held the trigger in his hands, and in 3 days, he was going to pull it, live. In front of the entire world, the ballroom of the Grand Excelsior Hotel was a symphony of excess. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped light onto a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. The air hummed with the sound of champagne flutes clinking, the murmur of polite, powerful conversations, and the gentle strains of a string quartet. It was a world of curated perfection, a bubble of wealth and influence so thick it felt bulletproof. And at the center of this glittering universe, on a raised dais at the front of the room, sat Marcus Thorne. He was the king in his court. He looked regal, untouchable, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his custom-tailored tuxedo fitting him like a second skin. He smiled, his famous smile, the one that graced the covers of magazines, the one that charmed billionaires and disarmed politicians. It was a predator's smile, all teeth and no warmth. Tonight, he was receiving the city's highest honor, the Metropolitan Beacon of Philanthropy Award. The irony was so thick, Leo felt he could choke on it. Leo wasn't in the ballroom, he was 3 blocks away, in a dingy, anonymous hotel room he'd paid for in cash. On the desk in front of him sat his laptop, a dozen browser tabs open to the various live streams of the gala. He had a clear view of the stage, of Thorne's triumphant face. His finger hovered over the send button on the mass email he had prepared. His heart was a frantic drum against his ribs. Sarah was with him. She had refused to let him do this alone. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clenched in her lap, her eyes fixed on the screen. She hadn't seen Thorne in person in 23 years. Looking at him now, so powerful, so celebrated, made her feel physically ill. "It's almost time," she whispered, her voice trembling. Leo nodded, his mouth dry. He had done everything he could. The video was primed. The email was ready. He had even sent an anonymous tip to Detective Sandoval, the weary cop from Arthur's shop, with a link to the video and the address of the hotel where they were staying. It was a confession of his own, a final act of surrender to whatever consequences came next. His only goal was to ensure that when the bomb went off, the fallout was inescapable. At precisely 8:58 p.m., the mayor of the city, a man whose campaign Thorne had bankrolled, stood at the podium and began his gushing introduction. A man of vision, of integrity, a true titan whose generosity knows no bounds. "My friend, Marcus Thorne." The room erupted in thunderous applause. Thorne rose, basking in the adoration, the spotlights glinting off his cufflinks. He approached the podium, his expression a perfect blend of humility and power. The cameras zoomed in on his face. "Thank you, Mayor," he began, his voice smooth as velvet, resonating through the ballroom. "I am truly humbled. When I look out at all of you tonight, I don't see patrons or donors, I see family. I see a community dedicated to lifting each other up." Leo's finger pressed down. Click. The email was sent. The digital grenade had been rolled into the room. Now, he could only watch and wait for the pin to be pulled. For the first minute, nothing happened. Thorne continued his speech, weaving a tapestry of lies about charity and compassion. Leo's heart sank. Had it failed? Had the email been caught? By spam filters? Had he been outsmarted again? Then, he saw it. A single flicker in the crowd. A man in the second row, a well-known journalist, glanced down at his phone. His eyes widened. He nudged the person next to him. Another phone came. Out, then another. A ripple of digital light spread through the dark ballroom, a virus of truth infecting the crowd. Heads began to turn, people whispering to each other, their faces transforming from polite adoration to confusion, then to shock. Up on the stage, Thorne noticed the shift. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. He was a man accustomed to rapt attention. The murmur in the room was growing louder, more agitated. His voice faltered for a fraction of a second. He tried to power through, raising his voice slightly. A commitment to a brighter future. A future built on trust and transparency. That's when the first sound cut through the air. It came from the phone of a young blogger near the front, her volume turned up too high. It was the panicked, slurred voice of Julian Vance. Ira, pick up, please, pick up. Thorne froze. His blood seemed to turn to ice in his veins. He knew that voice. It was a voice he hadn't heard in 23 years, a voice he had personally silenced. His carefully constructed mask of benign power began to crack. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple. Then another phone played the audio, then another. A cacophony of ghosts rising from the grave. The room was in chaos now, the whispers turning into gasps. People were standing up, staring at the stage, their phones held up like accusations. The video was spreading, being shared. Going viral in real time, the large screens on either side of the stage, which had been showing Thorne's smiling face, suddenly flickered. A young technician in the control booth, a kid making $20 an hour, had received the email. He'd watched the video, his face turning pale, and he made a decision. With a single click, he hijacked the ballroom's AV feed. Suddenly, the 5 photos from the Olympus camera filled the giant screens. Ilara's face, contorted in terror, magnified 10 feet high. Then the blurry shot of the fall. Julian's leg and hand, his signet ring glinting. The dark silhouette, and finally, the 5th photo. Marcus Thorne, kneeling in the nursery, rope in hand, his face a mask of cold fury, staring out at the horrified crowd. His own younger face, judging him from the past. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. All sounds ceased, except for the audio now being pumped through the ballroom's main sound system. The technician had patched it through. The entire room, the entire world watching on the live stream, heard it. Julian's final terrified words. The sickening crunch. The thud dot, and then, Thorne's own voice, amplified, echoing through the crystal-draped hall. Loose ends. The silence that followed was absolute, profound. It was the silence of a tomb. Every eye in the room was on Thorne. His face, projected on the screens beside his own murderous portrait, was a mess of confusion and terror. The mask was not just cracked. It had been shattered into a million pieces. He stood there, exposed, naked, a monster caught in the glare of 1,000 lights. He opened his mouth to speak. But only a dry, croaking sound came out. He looked desperately towards the wings, towards his security team, his fixers. But they were just staring, paralyzed with shock. Then, the main doors of the ballroom burst open. Detective Sandoval strode in, flanked by a dozen uniformed officers. The crowd parted before her, like the Red Sea. She didn't shout, she didn't need to. Her voice was calm, clear, and carried the weight of absolute authority. Marcus Thorne, she said, her voice cutting through the silence. You are under arrest for the murders of Julian and Ilara Vance. Thorne's legs seemed to give way. He stumbled back from the podium, his face ashen, his eyes wild with disbelief. This couldn't be happening. He was Marcus Thorne. He was untouchable. This is insane, he stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. It's a fabrication, a deepfake. I've been framed. Sandoval didn't even blink. She walked right up to the stage, the officers fanning out, securing the exits. You can tell it to the judge, she said, her voice cold as ice. She pulled out a pair of handcuffs. The metallic click as she opened them seemed to echo like a gunshot in the silent room. The video, the diary, the audio, we have it all. We also have a signed confession from your head of security, a Mr. Peterson, who was kind enough to tell us about the man he hired to assault an old photographer and torch his shop. He also told us where to dig in the gardens of Blackwood Manor. At the mention of the gardens, the last bit of color drained from Thorne's face. He knew what they would find there, the real loose ends. He made a last, desperate move. He lunged away from Sandoval, towards the side of the stage, trying to flee. But there was nowhere to go. 2 officers intercepted him, grabbing him in a brutally efficient hold. Thorne struggled, his tuxedo jacket ripping, his perfect facade dissolving into that of a desperate, cornered animal. "You can't do this to me," he shrieked, his voice raw with panic. "I am Marcus Thorne." The handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. The sound was deafening. The public justice, the cinematic payoff, was complete. The king had been dethroned. In his own throne room, his crimes laid bare for the entire world to see. The cameras, which had been there to broadcast his triumph, were now broadcasting his utter and complete ruin. Every news channel, every social media feed, was lit up with the image of the great philanthropist being dragged away in handcuffs. His face a mask of pathetic, impotent rage. In the hotel room 3 blocks away, Leo and Sarah watched, tears streaming down their faces. They were tears of relief, of grief, of a terrible, cathartic release. The ghosts of Alara and Julian Vance, silent for so long, had finally been heard. Their screams had become a roar that had brought down a kingdom. Leo closed his laptop. The explosion was over. Now, they had to face the emotional aftermath. The quiet world that existed in the shadow of the mushroom cloud they had created. The fallout from Marcus Thorne's arrest was a media supernova. It was more than a scandal. It was a modern myth. The story of the lost camera, the hidden diary, and the final explosive takedown dominated the global news cycle for weeks. Thorne's empire crumbled overnight. His name was stripped from buildings, his statues removed from public squares. His powerful friends deserted him, feigning shock and ignorance with a practiced ease. The trial was a formality. With the audio, confession, the diary, and the eventual discovery of Alara and Julian's remains buried beneath a weeping willow in the gardens of Blackwood Manor. Thorne's conviction was swift and absolute. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. Destined to rot in a maximum security prison, a forgotten monster stripped of his name, his power, and his freedom. For Leo and Sarah, the aftermath was quieter. More complex, they were hailed as heroes, their faces plastered everywhere. Leo, the intrepid urban explorer who had unearthed the truth. Sarah, the courageous witness who had finally found her voice. They were offered book deals, movie rights, daytime television interviews. They turned them all down. The noise and the adulation felt hollow, a grotesque parody of the quiet, brutal reality of what had been lost. They attended the memorial service for Alara and Julian. It was a small, private affair, held on a windswept cliff overlooking the ocean. Alara's elderly sister was there, a woman with the same crystalline blue eyes, her face a roadmap of grief. Julian's estranged parents, old and frail, wept silently. Sarah held Leo's hand as a eulogy was read, her grip tight. The cost of the truth felt immense, a weight in the air. 2 beautiful lives, stolen, a generation of pain for the families left behind. Justice felt like a poor consolation prize. For such a profound loss, after the service, Alara's sister approached them. She pressed a small velvet pouch into Leo's hand. "Alara would have wanted you to have this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Inside was a small silver pendant, shaped like a 5-pointed star. Blackwood Manor was torn down. Number 1 wanted the house with such a dark history. The land was donated to the city and turned into a public park. They called it Vance Memorial Garden. On the day it opened, Leo and Sarah walked the manicured paths. In the center, where the grand house once stood, A simple granite memorial had been erected. It didn't list their names. It was just a polished stone bench, and on the back, a single line was engraved. It was the title of Ellora's photography blog. Chasing the Light. Leo had given Arthur most of the money from the few interviews he'd reluctantly agreed to. The old photographer had rebuilt his shop, better than before, but the fire had taken something from him. He was quieter now, his gruffness softened by a deep-seated sadness. He had a new print framed on his wall, right above his counter. It wasn't one of Illyras, it was a simple, black-and-white photo Leo had taken of the memorial bench in the new park, the morning sun just catching its edge. Sarah's life changed in quieter ways. The ice audit vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared. Her son's law firm, in a fit of public relations-driven contrition, gave him a promotion and a raise. But the fear, the shadow of thorn that had haunted her for half her life, was slow to recede. Sometimes she would wake up in the middle of the night, her heart pounding, the sound of Ellora's cut-off scream echoing in her ears. The wound had been cauterized, but the scar remained, a tender, puckered reminder of her silence. She found a measure of peace in volunteering at a center for undocumented families, using her own story, her own trauma, to help others find the voice she had lost for so long. One crisp autumn afternoon, a year after the trial, Leo found himself back at Vance Memorial Garden. He sat on the granite bench, the silver star pendant cool against his skin. The park was full of life. Children laughed on the swings, couples walked hand in hand, a young man threw a frisbee for his dog. It was a place of peace, a place of healing, born from an unimaginable horror. He thought about the camera, that little black box that had started it all. It was sitting in a police evidence locker now, a silent, satisfied witness. It had done its job, it had told its story. He pulled out his own camera, a new digital one. He wasn't sure he would ever be an urban explorer again. He had seen the true darkness that lurked in abandoned places, and he had no desire to seek it out. But he still felt the need to capture moments, to frame the world, to chase the light. He saw a young girl, no older than 5, with bright red boots, jumping in a pile of fallen leaves. Her face a mask of pure, unadulterated joy. He raised his camera, focused, and clicked the shutter dot. It was a beautiful photo, a moment of life, of innocence, of light. He looked at the image on his screen, and for the first time in a long time, he smiled. The ghosts of Blackwood Manor were at rest. The truth had come at a terrible price, but it had also, in the end, cleared the ground for something new to grow. The emotional echo of the past would always linger, a haunting reminder of the darkness that men do. But here, in the afternoon sun, in the laughter of a child, there was also a promise that even after the most profound darkness, the light, eventually, will find its way back in. The story was over, but the world, in its own bittersweet way, continued. And that, he realized, was the most cathartic payoff of all.